Welcome to the Trauma Talks Returning Citizen Roundtable. Our guests today are Shaka Senghor, Eldra Jackson III, Jason Bryant, and Robert Mosqueda, all returning citizens, all great men, and we're going to talk about today about our childhood trauma. So I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. Welcome to the Compassion Prison Project Returning Citizen Roundtable in our show called Trauma Talks. So let's start with Shaka. Can you check in, please?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Shaka Senghor. I served 19 years in Michigan prison. I've been out for 10 years now, a little over 10 years, coming up on my 11th year. I am a writer, a tech investor, and a tech executive currently.
Great. Thank you, Shaka. Robert, can you check in, please?
Hi, my name is Robert Mosqueda. I have been in and out of incarceration for about 11 years. I am currently coming on my 10th year of being out of incarceration. And I have dedicated myself to education, gang intervention, and currently I am working to identify and get resources to our homeless youth.
Thank you. And how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling well, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Jason, will you check in, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Bryant. I served 20 years and 3 months in prison. First-time offender. I was 20 years old when I was incarcerated. And I have been out of prison for the last 10 months. On March 27th of last year, largely in part to some of the positive work I was involved in while incarcerated, Governor Newsom commuted my sentence and ordered both me and my co-defendants immediate release from prison. So today I work as the Director of Restorative Programs for the nonprofit CROP organization, and we're working to help reimagine reentry through creating a holistic program that addresses people's need coming home from prison to have the necessary work skills, job placements, and housing components to ensure that they succeed upon reentry. And today I'm feeling incredibly blessed and just grateful to be a part of this conversation with you all.
Thank you, Jason. And Eldra Jackson III, please check in.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And first of all, welcome home, Jason, and congratulations. My name is Eldra Jackson III, and I served 24 years of a life sentence in the California prison system. I have been home a little over 6 years now, and I currently serve as co-executive director of Inside Circle, an organization that I credit with finding me and helping save my life. And what we do today with Inside Circle is continue to support the men inside, as well as youth across this country, particularly in New Jersey, to gain a second chance at a first-class life. And I am feeling truly inspired today. Thank you.
And Shaka, I don't think we found out how you were feeling.
I feel amazing. So I'm home right now. My son is in there on Zoom school, and it's a great day to be a dad. He just passed one of his tests, so he was really excited, which makes me excited. So I'm pretty good. It's Friday as well, so there's always that. And welcome home, Jason. So happy that you got your freedom again, and it's a blessing for sure.
So the purpose of this roundtable is to bring this program into prisons and to give the people that are viewing this program a way to connect with themselves through your experiences. So the first thing I want to do is run the circle, the Compassion Trauma Circle with you, if you're all available for that, where we will expose the traumas that happened to us when we were children. The reason we're doing this is men and women are not available to be in circle right now. They're isolated and they're in lockdown. So by you sharing your experience, they get to see themselves in you. And by seeing themselves in you, they realize they're not alone. And that's the first step in healing, is knowing that you're part of a group, part of a community, and part of this traumatic experience that we've all had. So I'm going to read the 10 adverse childhood experiences. And as I say them, just raise your hand if they're true for you. And if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand, that's okay. There's no one has to come forward, but the more vulnerability we have, the more we break through of our own prisons. So are we ready to begin the compassion trauma circle?
Yes.
Okay. Prior to your 18th birthday, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be physically hurt, please raise your hand. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, please raise your hand. If an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you, please raise your hand. If you often felt very often or often that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other, please raise your hand. If you often or very often felt that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it, please raise your hand. If your parents were ever separated or divorced, please raise your hand. If your mother or stepmother was often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, sometimes often or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife, please raise your hand. If you lived in a house with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs, please raise your hand. If a household member was depressed or mentally ill, or if a household member ever attempted suicide, please raise your hand. If a household member went to prison, please raise your hand. So please, with showing with your hand how many ACEs that you endured, please just show it to the
I think it was.
we have 8 and we have 8. So we have 3 people with 8, 1 with 1, and 1 with 3. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about what trauma does to the brain and body, just so you can have this information as we go forward in our discussion. When the body is traumatized, the prefrontal cortex, which is your executive function, the part that knows about morality, good or bad, the wisdom center, that shuts down. And you're in your amygdala, which is in the back of your brain, and you go into fight or flight. With these repetitive stresses in childhood, you have no ability to make good decisions. You've stopped really thinking clearly, and you actually forget what you've done in times of stress. So knowing this, and also knowing that if you have 4 or more ACEs, you are 7 times more likely to go to prison, I'd like to open up the discussion to all of you, and maybe we can just go around and see what we learned in this moment. Eldra, do you want to start?
Sure. I can definitely identify in my life where traumas that I suffered as a child informed how I viewed myself and how I viewed others. And that information then went on to dictate how I showed up in the world, the impact that I had in the world, how I treated others, how I treated myself, what I thought things meant. And these are things that I formulated when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And I can see where I was, in my 20s and 30s, still operating with that 7 or 8-year-old running the show in a grown man's body.
Go ahead. Just guys, check in as you want. Go ahead.
So for me, on the surface, I went to prison largely in spite of my upbringing. I was raised in a loving 2-parent household, an only child by my mother. I have 4 half brothers and a half sister on my dad's side, but it was largely just me. And you think like, why? How could someone who's middle class? My mom is Italian, my father was Black. Ultimately that had every opportunity to succeed. How could you make a choice to participate in a series of crimes, robberies, the last of which resulted in the murder of a human being, right? And for me, when we're talking about trauma, sometimes it's not as, at least in my opinion, as blatant as like physical abuse or, being around violence to some degree. But for me, my earliest memory was a fight, a verbal disagreement between my parents. And I was only like 4 years old maybe. And it's the first memory I have. And my mom was, with her Italian firebrand way of being, she was getting in my dad's face, and she did the unthinkable. She called him the N-word. And the way my dad jumped up and chased her down the hall, she made it to the bathroom and she locked the door, and there was no actual physical altercation. There was just the threat of it. But in that moment, I recognized like what I was supposed to do if anyone did or said anything that made me seem like I was less of a person than they were. And from there on, it was like anytime someone tried to embarrass me or especially use that word, I was ready to get violent because I saw it. In many ways, I was traumatized by it. Like I had never seen that type of violence in my home before, or that type of threat of violence before. But I knew that that's what I had to do. And by the time I got to second grade, I went to predominantly white schools. And second grade was the first time I had that experience with me, where there was a young boy who, wanted to make it a point that I knew that I was an N-word. And he would do it every day. And every day after class, I would meet him in the parking lot and we'd fight. And what was so traumatizing or remarkable and memorable in my mind at the time, it wasn't that we were fighting because he was calling me that name. It was when his mother would pick me up and I would be crying, he called me this, he called me this. She would give me the look like, that's exactly what you are. And like, those are the moments where I started forming this idea of how it is. And those were the moments when I started making decisions like, I don't want to watch the Smurfs anymore. I don't want to watch Gilligan's Island. I want to watch, Rambo. I want to watch Die Hard. And I want to hang out with the kids who are willing to get violent and willing to get tough, because that's what it means to be a man. And that cycle of creating this worldview of what it meant to be a man and what it meant to be tough, it metastasized to a point that when I was 20 years old, I'm sitting in front of a house with a loaded weapon saying, let's go rob these drug dealers. And, as a result of that, serving over 20 years in prison. So, and the real scary part is that like some of these experiences, like I never even thought about them as having such a huge impact on how I interpreted the world until it was almost too late. Right. And you're sitting in prison with a life sentence. So with that, I'm complete.
You are hypervigilant. You began to be hypervigilant, which is a sign of PTSD at 4 years old. And that changed your brain, and that changed you armored up, and it changed how you experienced the world. Shaka, do you want to respond? Yeah,
first of all, just thank you so much for sharing your journey, because I don't think it's heard often enough. I grew up in a household that on the outside looking in looked like the ideal middle-class Black family. My dad worked for the state. He was also in the Air Force Reserves. My mother was a homekeeper, but it was a very violent household. My mother would beat my older siblings often, and with the anger that was just, terrifying. And you know, as I got older, she began to beat me. And it was very different though. And I think part of it was because my older siblings, they have a different father who my mother married when she was about 16. So she had 3 kids by the time she was 19 when she met my dad. And, you know, the way that she beat them and what she beat them with was different from how she beat me. She definitely beat me with, you know, a belt and left welts and things of that. And, you know, my father was complicit in it because he didn't do anything to prevent it. But one of the things that I remember early on is that there was something about my dad where he knew it was wrong, because whenever he was charged with administering uh, basically ass whoopings is what we call it in the hood, if she wasn't there, he wouldn't do it. And he would just be like, you know, when she come home, act like it happened. So we had to act a part of trauma. And, you know, I remember being asked questions over the years, like, when did you first hit the streets? And I would always say, you know, 13, 14 years old or whatever. And then I was in a conversation, I was doing an interview, I was being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. And she asked me that question, and I gave the kind of answer that I typically gave. Oh, yeah, I ran away when I was 13 or 14. And she was like, let me take you back to this moment that you write about. I'm a writer, for those who don't know my work. I've written extensively about my life journey toward prison. And she was like, there was a moment when you were about 9 years old, when you came home from school and you had done good on the test. And when you came in the house and you began to tell your mother about it, she threw a pot at your head. And my mother had threw this cast iron pot with such force that, you know, I ducked, but it shattered the tiles on the wall behind me. And she was basically like, that's when you hit the streets. And ever since that conversation, I really went back and began to examine how different I became after that moment and other moments. And so, you know, growing up in that household, you know, my mother would hit me. I would go outside and get into a fight and hit somebody else. And it started this kind of cycle. And the same thing would happen with my siblings where, you know, they were always fighting each other. And, you know, I was always up under the threat of the violence, being the younger sibling and the younger step sibling. So I think there was some jealousy in regards to how she treated them versus how she treated me, even though all of the treatment was terrible. Nonetheless, they saw it through their own trauma lens. You know, when I ran away from home, I got, you know, sucked into the street culture, started selling crack cocaine, you know, before we even knew the damage of what crack cocaine was. And I experienced all the horrors that come with that culture. I was robbed at gunpoint. I was beat nearly to death by 3 grown men. My first introduction to sex was through the lens of being a drug dealer and being sexually intimate with a drug addicted woman. And then from there, being kind of pulled into this adult world where I primarily sexually engaged with adult women, you know, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And so, you know, the levels of trauma that I've experienced in my life are, you know, beyond numerous. I mean, I was shot when I was 17 years old. And, you know, the thing I remember most about being in the hospital, you know, after being shot, is that nobody ever asked me how I felt or what I was thinking. And so when I went back to the neighborhood, you know, I didn't even realize, I didn't even have a name for what I experienced, but I knew how I felt, you know, standing outside and feeling vulnerable and feeling like every car that came up the block was potentially a death chariot. And so I began to carry a gun every day. And I had experience with carrying guns, but it became like an obsession to the point where no matter what I was doing, I always had a gun. I mean, eating dinner, using the bathroom, you know, being in bed intimate, I had a gun up under my pillow and just, you know, one in the corner. And, and so, you know, 16 months later, I found myself in a conflict. And one of the things, just to go back a little bit, after I got shot, I remember starting to tell myself this story, that if I found myself in a conflict, that I would actually shoot first. And 16 months later, nearly 2 a.m, after leaving another traumatic event, which was I was DJing a party and somebody got shot in front of the party. And when I packed up my equipment to leave, I was on heightened alert. And when I got back to my block, which was like literally right around the corner, car pulled up, guy wanted to make a drug transaction that I didn't want to make. We got into an argument. That argument escalated really quickly. And then there was this moment when, I decided to walk away, and I turned to walk away, and I heard what I thought was this man getting out of the car, and I turned and I fired multiple shots, tragically causing his death. And, I was subsequently arrested, charged with open murder, sentenced to 17 to 40 years for second-degree murder, end up serving 19 years, and 7 of those years in solitary confinement. And while I was in prison, I was operating out of that trauma lens. So I got into every type of fight you can think of, and stabbings, and, wars on the yard between, conflicting organizations. And, 9 years in, I caught another case, getting into a conflict with an officer. And that led to me being in solitary at that point for 4.5 years straight. But it was in that environment that I really just began kind of reconciling my childhood and being honest. And, I grew up in a culture where we don't often frame the beating of children through the lens of abuse. It was just like, yo, this is discipline. You get your ass whooped, and that's life as a Black kid growing up. And I'm sure it's like that for other communities, but I can only speak from my experience, and it's normalized. And so when I was in prison, sitting in solitary confinement, I asked myself this question: how did I go from this kid with dreams of being a doctor to serving out my most promising years in prison? And from there, I went on this journey of journaling, and I went back and I examined every act of violence that had been, committed against me, and every act of violence that I had committed. And I would go back and read those journals, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience to realize that this was a kid that had experienced more trauma by the time I was, 19 years old than most people who have gone to war. High levels of gun violence. My mother has 3 sons. All 3 of us have been shot. All of us have been in prison. A total of 8 members of my family have been shot. And so as I began to just examine like that level of trauma, and I began to talk to the men around me and realized that all our experiences mirrored each other in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And, I realized at that point that the way out of this prison loop is to really address the traumas that we experience, and to be honest about them, and to give names to these things, and to not use them as weapons of shame, which is often the case. Even when you ask the question about have we ever had a sexual experience that wasn't of our own, thinking with somebody 5 years above, years ago, I wouldn't have raised my hand because that shit was normalized for us. It was normal for, a 13-year-old boy to have his first sexual experience with a grown woman. And we don't typically see that as damaging emotionally or mentally in our community. And so it's something that I'm actually writing about now, because I think it's so important, especially being a dad raising, a 9-year-old son, and understanding all the things that was taken from me as a child. The other part of it is earlier, when I was listening to Eldra, it made me think about the stories we tell ourselves and how we begin to see ourselves through an adult lens, even though our brains aren't fully developed, and we take on so much of that ownership of things that happen to us, or the way that we reacted to those things based on the culture of growing up in it, where it's so normalized, and there's so many young guys I know that have either shot somebody, been in jail, been in these, unhealthy sexual dynamics, but it's normalized and it's celebrated in this very toxic way. And so, as a dad and as a mentor to many, and as someone who's found a pathway towards self-love, it's really important to really call these things exactly what they are. And you can reconcile those things. Like I reconcile who my mother was and why she was the way she was. She came through, high levels of trauma. By the time she was 16, she was in an abusive marriage. She had been through a lot of things. And so that opened a pathway for forgiveness. But even deeper for me, it helped me disconnect from all the negative things that I heard from her or experienced at her hands, and separate that from like, that's somebody else's narrative that doesn't belong to me. And so I've had to recreate a narrative that was really about honoring, the little boy that was trapped in this adult body.
Thank you, Shaka. Robert.
My story isn't unique than others. I find it a little funny sometimes when people ask me, how long did I do time? I've been doing time my whole life. My father was 35 years Department of Corrections. I was an inmate before I was ever a son. Some of the common words that I'd be told as a kid is as a moron, I'm a spastic, an idiot, an imbecile. The CDCR belt that they hang their cuffs and keys on, I used to get beat with that. I remember, the keys used to be very traumatic for me. Hearing the jingling of the keys, I could tell what type of temper my father was in that day. And we lived in a middle class family, but we never had the extras, at least us kids didn't. I remember growing up with 2 pairs of pants and 3 t-shirts, and if you got them dirty, boy, you got your butt whooped. My flight or fight response was so in tune at a young age. I could be in one side of the house in my bedroom and the garage clear on the other side, and I could hear that motor. I could hear that garage door open. And I can reflect back now, and I can remember the anxiety and my heart fluttering and racing. I remember at times waking up at the middle of the night to get a beating because I had a stepmother who was very narcissistic. She loved you when she wanted to love you, when it suited her. And when it didn't suit her, if she was in a bad mood, it was always at wait until your father gets home. So, the clock started to be a tool of anxiety because you start looking at that clock like, oh, shit, he's coming home. Excuse my language. He's coming home. We're getting ready. And I grew up with 2 older siblings, 2 older sisters, and our love for one another is what got us through that abuse that took place in the house. My mother and my father were separated. My mother wasn't from this country. She was from Scotland. I'm half Mexican, half Scottish. And, my mother's tools for coping was alcohol. And at a young age, I didn't really understood what that was. It became traumatic for me because my mother was always drinking. I'd have to lie to the cops because she's constantly, drinking and driving and hitting things. So, cops would show up at the house and I'm telling them, oh, my mom's been home all day. Nope, somebody must have stole our car. And I'm covering for my mom. And I had a lot of anger and resentment towards my mother later on in life. But what I didn't realize, and like Shaka was saying, was that, I didn't understand my mother was in a country with no family, no resources, no loved ones. And that was her coping mechanism. Although it wasn't the healthiest of coping mechanisms, that was her coping mechanism. And I had to resolve that in order to forgive her. I've suffered losses. I've been in these streets. Like I like to tell my youth, I've paid the cost to be the boss. But that in itself brings its own trauma. Growing up in CDCR, I remember I was doing shoe terms before I knew what a shoe term was. I'd be grounded and isolated in my room. I remember I have a good homeboy of mine. I've known him 30 some odd years. We grew up together, same neighborhoods, ran the same streets together. I remember one time he thought that I moved away. He hadn't seen me in a year. I've been locked in my room. I go to school, I come home, do extra chores, but I didn't go outside. And so I learned how to self-isolate. I learned how to do time. And, I was already institutionalized in my mind. My mind was already structured. My days were already structured. My father was super structured in that way. And I really started hitting these streets probably around 15, 16. And then, I turned into an adult and immediately started catching cases. Possessions of firearms, of batteries, gang-related situations. And, the one positive choice I made in my career at that time was I was going to join the Marines. And I remember seeing the homeboys one last time, and we got into a big fight. Somebody got hurt, and boom, I'm locked back up. The only thing that saved me that day was the fact that I was already trying to go to the Marines. So the judge gave me an option. You can either take this to trial, and you're looking at 10 to 15 if you're convicted, or you can go to the Marines. And I went to the Marines, but I wasn't healthy inside. I was full of trauma. I was full of anger. I was full of hurt. And I loved the Marine Corps. I loved everything that I did in it, but it was a specialized tool for me to take out my anger and aggressions. And, it's like everybody's saying on this panel, you have this trauma, you have these things, you can only put so much layers on them. They find the cracks to come through. I turned to alcoholism. Again, I'm in an environment that is institutionalized. Your frame of thinking is told for you. You're given a mission. Your job is to plan out the action. How do you do it? Boom, this is your job. Move. And you make that done. And I remember I was on a deployment, and my sister, who was only 4 years older than me, she passed away. And it shook me. It shook me. She was 26 at the time. She had never done drugs, never been a part of any type of lifestyle, traditional American dream, white picket fence, husband, kid. She's going to school, putting her and working at the same time. And she got autoimmune hepatitis, and her immune system had started attacking her liver, and she couldn't she couldn't get a transplant fast enough. And that really shook me, because I became angry with God. How are you going to take her? I've done everything to try to kill myself without physically trying to kill myself. I put myself in situations to cause harm. I've caused harm to others. And how are you going to take this good person from me? And I became very angry again. I got out of the Marine Corps because then my mind cycle started fast forwarding, like, man, she's only 26 and she passed away. I'm 22 and I want to have a family. I want to have kids. I want to have this. And it's like how I'm talking this fast is how my mind was going. Boom, 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 boom. I'm trying to process all these things. And I hit the streets back out here, and I didn't know how to think for myself. I remember profoundly people asking me all the time, like, Rob, what do you want to do? And me looking back, what do you want me to do? Tell me what to do. If you tell me what to do, I can do it. But that ability to think for myself, to formulate a thought, to formulate an idea, to construct my own life, I did not know how to do that. And so I went back to what I knew how to do. I knew how to survive. And I got back into selling dope. I got back into, the street life. And what was crazy about it is what put me back in there was incarceration. I went back to jail for a fight outside. It was an argument between me and a friend. I was drunk. The cops came and took me. And although I was already a part of an organization prior to going to the Marine Corps, when you go to jail, they ask you who you run with. So I'm just being honest. Hey, when I was a kid, this is what I used to do. This is who I used to be with. Hey, but I went to the Marines and, I haven't been a part of that. Well, classification puts you right where they said they're going to put you, right with your own. And so I assimilated back to my environment. That's what I knew. And so then I started getting re-wrapped up into that culture, and all of that culture in itself perceived trauma. I sold drugs, and anybody that's ever been a part of that lifestyle, that's a 24/7 operation. You trust nobody. You know, I've seen close friends that are part of that game out of jealousy, or somebody's been up too many days and they're having abstract thoughts and they're getting killed. So I trusted nobody.
Robert,
And I brought the environment.
Robert, I just want to bring it back to childhood trauma, because that's the focus. But if you want to just tell us about, maybe just wrap it up and just tell us what happened in prison, if you want to just say something quick.
Well, you know, so what happened in prison was that kind of caused me to deal with my trauma, because where it started was prison. My father being who he was, I was forced to deal with the uniform. I was forced to deal with that belt. I was forced to deal with those keys and identify those triggers of trauma, and then have to start self-reflecting in that healing process. And I'll just share this really quick. What really done it for me, what really triggered me, was I only got one visit. And as we all know, you know, we get the first embrace and last embrace. And my daughter was 5 years old at the time. And I remember that our time had expired, and she's hugging me and she's got her little arms wrapped around my neck. And our time has expired. Her mom's pulling her off of me and her hands are trying to hold on to her daddy. And I felt her hands slip away, her tears streaming down her face. And she started to scream, "I want my daddy. I want my daddy. I want my daddy." It was at that point that I woke up and I realized that it was my lifestyle that was hurting her. It was my lifestyle that was causing her young life trauma and forced me to start working on mine.
Thank you, Robert. Really great. This is a great roundtable. Eldra, we haven't heard enough from you, so I'm going to go back to you. But I also want to just bring up the idea of the normalization of violence, because that's what the United States is endorsing and has supported. It's in our police, it's in our prisons, it's in our families. And I thought violence was normal. I thought that you fought. I thought that's what you did. And it looks like for most of you, you wouldn't be alive if you hadn't probably pulled the trigger first. So Eldra, I want to start back with you. But if you want to talk more about your childhood trauma or talk about normalization, or both.
Certainly both. I can touch on both briefly. When you speak about the normalization of violence, I'm a product of the 70s. My dad was he was in the military as well. He was a drill sergeant in the Army. So I grew up with a foot in my ass. But I also grew up traveling the world when it was the US versus the USSR. I remember climbing under a desk for a drill, because this is what we're supposed to do when they start dropping these nuclear bombs on us. So I grew up with violence being the norm. I grew up, as Shaka talked about, with corporal punishment ruling the day. I don't even know if child protective services existed during that time. You showed out, you got your ass beat. Going to school, we used to bring home permission slips on the first day of school to have your parents sign, so the teachers could kick your ass in school if you got out of pocket. You could either get it at school or you could get it at home. And oftentimes it was, going to be a whole lot lighter in school than it would have been at home. My childhood trauma, I'm able to point to what I refer to as the original sin. And being molested at the age of 7 years old by a babysitter, female babysitter. And that informed how I viewed women, how I viewed relationships, how I viewed sex. That I'm still dealing with stuff from that today. And I'm married with children and have issues with intimacy and being completely open. And that same babysitter had a brother who was a couple of years older than her. And those experiences informed that moving forward in my life, if there was ever, a situation where there was a top and a bottom, where there was a victim and a victimizer, I was going to be the victimizer in whatever the situation was. I was not going to be the one who was catching the losing end of it. And it didn't so much play out when I was, 7, 8, 9 years old, but it was in there. The seeds were in there. I was able to play that out when I was on the baseball field, when I was on the football field, and it showed up as a competitive desire. But when I made the choice to go out into the streets and into the gutter and pick up a particular lifestyle, I was already well suited to thrive in the gang culture. based on how I was raised, the discipline that was instilled by my father. It was very easy for me to maintain rules and order and structure. And this is how it goes. This is what the Constitution is. If you do this, this is what happens. If you don't do this, this is what happens. That was nothing for me. That was how I was raised. That was what was instilled in me in my household. And then the childhood trauma was just something that enabled me to be able to detach from my own humanity. It was something that enabled me to deal with people, but not see people, to see objects that were in my way from where I was trying to get. I didn't see people. I didn't even see myself or know myself as a person. You were either behind me, which meant you were with me. But if you were in front of me, you were something to be knocked down and bowled over. It wasn't a human being. So that was something that made it very easy for me to see blood and guts and all sorts of other things that, you know, a child should have thrown up seeing and laugh and think that it was funny. And when somebody asked, why'd you do that? My response was, I don't know, or because it was fun. That's how my trauma informed me.
This is called othering, and violence is what allows racism to be something that we're still dealing with. Violence, when we're violent towards another person, and I'll go back to Eldra, I didn't mean to, but I just want to bring this point, is that violence is what creates the separation, and trauma is what creates the separation. It makes us feel that we don't belong. And we look for groups that look like us so that we can feel belonging. But the truth is, we all belong together. We're all in this together. And when you're hurting, I'm hurting. So let's go around and talk about the normalization of violence in our culture, but also in prisons. Shaka, do you want to say something? And then we'll get back to you, Eldra.
Yeah, sure. You know, growing up, so I'm from the city of Detroit, and you know, I tell people all the time, like, the gun violence in Detroit is at a level that would shock most people. You know, like, seriously. And you know, I had this moment when I got out of prison. One of my nephews got shot. And I remember standing outside the hospital, and, you know, I saw all his friends with the Rest in Peace t-shirts from different childhood friends of theirs that had got shot. And then I saw my parents pull up, and I just was like, this was like the 5th time they had been at the same hospital for one of us who had got shot. So it was me and my 3 brothers, my nephew, and then my brother-in-law. And, you know, it shows up in the culture in different ways. It just depends on how it's depicted. It, like, you know, I grew up watching Scarface and, you know, The Godfather and Miller's Crossing and, you know, all these films. And when you grow up being a victim, you know, to be able to turn around and have the power in your hands, you know, of a gun to protect yourself, to make yourself feel safe, it feels like second nature, because you're operating out of survival, and that's what I was operating out of. And you know, I was in the car with my brother when he got shot. So that happened. I was like 15 years old. You know, my first childhood friend was murdered when I was about 14. And you know, we had one of the bloodiest summers growing up. You know, when crack cocaine first hit Detroit, you know, the number of murders was just unconscionable. You know, even now, people point to Chicago, you know, as just the level of gun violence in Chicago is just preposterously absurd when you think about other places. But even with that, you know, Chicago has 3 million people. Detroit has about 700,000. And so when you get into the per person thing, like, it's just a different level. And so that's normal. You know, the hospitals, the way that they process young men and women inside, like, it's just like very robotic. But deeper than that, and more importantly, is what we all have been talking about, which is the violence that happens in a household and the interpersonal violence. And, you know, I do these roundtables with some of my friends, and one day, and I'll just say this last thing, because I want to leave time for everybody else. You know, having women bear witness to what men's experiences are is really important to disrupt the cycle of violence in our communities. And, you know, I asked them often, like, you know, the men in my life is like, when was the first time you had your heart broken? And most of them point back to the first time their mother hit them in the words that accompanied the hitting. You know, I am striking you with this force because I love you. And like, that's so confusing to the mind of a child. And, you know, I have a 9-year-old son. I can't even imagine how different his life would be if I hit him at all, first of all, but more so if I hit him out of anger and what that would do to that young, precious brain. And so I think a lot of the disruption of violence starts within, you know, the personal experiences. And then, of course, there's the systemic reality of the violence of prison. You know, it is so hard to leave that place without scars. And, you know, you think about the daily indignities of never feeling safe, and not in terms of like what another person who's serving time would do, but the reality is that you can be in your bunk sleep and an officer can come to your cell and say, come out so I can strip search you. And so it's this willing violation of your body that you have to be complicit in, otherwise it's forced upon you. You know, there's many who have witnessed the force, searches of a person's body. And so your body, you never feel safe. And I realized that, you know, carrying a gun was really about feeling safe, not necessarily going out to hurt somebody, but to feel safe. And, you know, even now, like I've been free for, 10 years, but imagine, when the social unrest began to happen and we didn't know what was happening in the country. And because I'm a felon, like I can't have a firearm to protect my home. And so those old feelings came back up of like, well, I could get one off the streets, and so that it's not those conversations in our heads. They don't go away. We just manage them differently. And so I've learned to just manage what I was thinking versus what was really happening. And, that's a powerful tool to have. Otherwise, I would be no different than anybody else who gets out of prison and know that there's a chance to going back if I get caught with a firearm. But if I didn't kind of retool how I managed the trauma, then I would be like anybody else who comes out and say, look, I got to get a gun because it's dangerous out here. And so I would just say to, our brothers and sisters tuning in, you're going to have to do a lot of the hard work on your own. We can't rely on the system to do it. And it really starts with going back and reassigning responsibility to the narrative that you've probably carried your whole life. Like I grew up thinking I was a bad person and didn't realize like, it's not my narrative. That's a narrative that was handed down to me along with the ass whoopings that I got. And I had to separate those narratives from my actual narrative. And so that's the hard work. Journaling is a great tool. Meditation, practicing mindfulness, really bringing yourself back to the moment you're in and not the story that you're telling yourself or you've told yourself. And understanding when you come home, it's going to have to double those efforts if you want to remain free. Those of us who have got out and become successful, it's because we've learned to manage the traumatic experiences that we've been through in a way that allows us to see ourselves as full human beings.
Wow. Jason, do you want to say something about the normalization of violence, which it seems like that happened in your life?
Sure. So, I can speak a little bit to what Shaka was sharing about prison. Over 20 years of incarceration, what is most instructive to me is the ways in which we would normalize violence inside. I actually spent my last 10 years of incarceration at an institution called CTF Soledad. And while I was there, during the last 3 years, there was an active war between two pretty big gangs. And over the course of this war, there was no less than 15 large-scale melees, all of which I was a witness to, whether on the yard or through the window. And just large scales of violence and people getting hurt. And what was really, like, for me, just sad and scary was how people would not care so much because it was so normal in there to see that type of stuff. It would be like, well, I wonder if we're going to have program today. Or you might see somebody get stabbed and say, well, am I going to be able to get to canteen? Right. And it's largely, I believe, a result of this attitude that, or this perspective of people who are incarcerated being less than human, many times, as Shaka was talking about, we're objectified while we're incarcerated. So those stereotypes and those ways of thinking about, violence being normalized from how we grew up all the way back to prison. When we get there, it's like, okay, well, this makes sense. I'm being treated like an animal, so I should behave as one, right? And it's a very scary and marginalized way of existing in this world. And, for myself, only being a little close to 11 months out of prison, really, I haven't even processed all of the objectifying ways I was treated, all of the dangerous situations. I can bring to recollection one incident where there was a riot in every wing simultaneously. So you had COs running every which way, they're pulling people out bleeding, and it's like, okay, well, what's really happening here, right? And just having the space to process those types of situations that in many ways we just close down. And so for me, just getting more in touch with what it means to be a human being, to have compassion for the next person. So often in times we, especially in prison, we objectify each other by the color of our skin, by who we run with, by the color of our clothes. We're obviously objectified often by officers, and I think it goes both ways. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And if we can find a way to get back to that, like people investing in people caring about people, then, we could work through some of these issues that we have.
Thank you, Jason. And I just want to comment, when you're traumatized to the level that people in prison are, we numb, and America's numb, basically. We can all say that we're all numb. And we don't want to deal with the violence. We don't want to face the violence. We don't want to think about solitary confinement. We don't want to think about what's going on. But that numbing allows us to get through the day. But then the costs are, we don't feel when we're hurting our children. We don't feel when we're drinking alcohol. We don't feel. And so thank you for bringing that up. Robert, what you got?
It is the normalized of violence. And the other thing that happens is you lose a sense of empathy. I had no idea what empathy was. And like Jason was talking about and others, I remember being in those situations like, well, damn, am I getting canteen today, or are we going to go to the store, or, what, it wasn't that you lost a life or somebody was maimed or injured or, got hurt. I remember being a part of a melee, and we were hogtied and handcuffed out on the yard, and we're laughing. We're actually laughing. It didn't mean nothing that one person had to be metaflighted out of there. It didn't mean nothing to us. It was laughter. And that's one of the hard parts is when you start to realize the pain and the anguish that you feel, and some that you inflicted on others because of that pain and anguish that you feel. It's emotionally tolling. It is emotionally tolling to purge yourself of that. But it is. We live in a society that is based on violence. It's based on drama. It's based on, what's going to get us the most ratings. A lot of the TV shows, what we see, what we hear in music, let alone what we encounter on a day-to-day basis, it does dehumanize people. It dehumanizes the person in front of you. You no longer look at that person as another human being. For me, I started looking at people as chess pieces, and how you're going to fit on my board and who's expendable. And that's all related to trauma. And it really does dehumanize and takes away your ability to have empathy at that time.
Thank you. Eldra, do you have something else you want to say about this before we move on to resilience? And I just want to check in on the time. Has everybody got enough time for another round? Yeah?
I have to hop off in a minute.
Okay, then Eldra, let's have Shaka just talk about resilience, how he overcame the trauma, and what's next?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Eldra, for, allowing me time. I got to hop for another call and then get my son to his mom's and daddy life and business life. But I want to say resilience to me is a muscle that we really have to exercise. I think part of it, not just exercise, but it's also something we have to bring back into remembrance. Anybody who's endured the penal system, the street culture, resiliency is organically embedded in, the fibers of our cells, because survival is what, is kind of like the building blocks in a way. And so it's just recognizing that these same things that allow us to survive are things that can allow you to thrive. Your willingness to, be courageous in times of uncertainty, like that same courage that requires you to run into that melee. It's the same type of courage that requires you to figure out a pathway toward doing something productive and meaningful. Those same kind of things where you recognize your own strength when you're afraid, like that happens when you're trying to build a business. And so a lot of the building blocks are already there. It's just reframing them, re-identifying them, recognize them as assets as opposed to liabilities. When Robert was talking about, being hogtied and laughing, right? I think that humor inside prison is a trauma response that allows us to even recognize the absurdity of what we're going through and to know that we've come out on the other side of it. And so for me, I knew it was all about one moment at a time. And one of my philosophies is, if you can get through the pain of the moment, you can come out on the other side of that. But you have to acknowledge that it is a moment. It's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow. It's literally the moment that you're in. And to me, as you take a series of proactive steps to get through those moments, like you come out on the other side stronger. And, anybody who's currently incarcerated, if you woke up today, that's an expression of your resiliency and your willingness to survive. And so now you have to add to that repertoire of skill sets that allows you to survive so that you can actually thrive. And, even when I think about Jason, only being home 11 months, we come out and we hit the ground, we're running, we're going hard. And what I realized for myself, and I'm not sure what it's like for other people, is I went so hard when I came home. It was hustle, 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 busy, busy, busy. And I realized I was running because I was afraid. I was afraid to look in that rearview mirror for fear that I might stumble and end up back in that space, disappoint myself, let myself down. And I was running from this idea of the old me because I hadn't fully embraced, the real me. Now, I won't even say the new me, but the real me. And it wasn't until I got to a space where I was like, I'm fucking amazing. I'm incredible. I'm talented. I'm gifted. I'm business savvy. And I'm curious. And I think curiosity was more important than all those things because I was willing to go into spaces that I otherwise would have shrunk from. I've been a fellow at MIT Media Lab. I taught at the University of Michigan. I remember when I did a TED Talk, like I was out like 4 years and I'm on a biggest speaker platform. And when they invited me to do a TED Talk, I thought it was like Ted the teddy bear from that TV show. And I didn't realize this was the biggest platform you could be on as a speaker. And I was afraid, but I got through the fear of that moment and I was able to come out on the other side with new language for people who was trying to help those who were incarcerated. And so I just say, it's easy to have a big vision picture of I just want to get out and I just want to stay out. But there's also this responsibility we have to nurture ourselves in a way that says, look, I'm worthy of thriving. I'm worthy of having a home. I'm worthy of having a partner. I'm worthy of being a dad, being a mom, being an entrepreneur, being an everyday worker, whatever your thing is, you have to know that you're worthy of it. So I encourage you all to journal, to write it down, to meditate, to filter out, old narratives from real narratives, and just to be present in the moment and know that that's the only thing that we can control.
Thank you, Shaka. Just really quick, if you can just You talked about in one of your articles when you were in solitary, you made that decision. What was that decision?
Well, the decision I made was based on a letter I got from my oldest son. And he told me his mom had told him while I was in prison. And I realized in that moment that, I owed him a father that he can be proud of, whether I was getting out of prison or not. And that's when I began my journey as a writer. And so I wrote my first book in prison. I ended up writing about 4 before I got out. And I hustled those books out the trunk of my car all the way until one of them reached Oprah. And then I didn't necessarily have to hustle out the trunk of my car anymore because the books were on shelves in bookstores all over the world. But I've never stopped nurturing, those books. And, I'm coming up next month, it'll be 5 years since Right My Wrongs was released on a major platform, and it's still selling as if it just came out. And I just finished up the second book that should be putting out next February that I'm really proud of and really excited about. But it all started with just taking that one step toward myself. So thank you for having me. I wish I could stay longer. And thank you all for sharing your stories. And I'm sure we'll all be in contact. So let me I'll drop my email in the main chat just so we can stay connected. And I look forward to hearing from you and seeing how I can support anybody. And yeah.
Absolutely. And we're planning a roundtable with former wardens and correctional officers, and I hope you can join us for that as well.
Absolutely. All right. Peace, y'all.
Thank you, Shaka.
All right.
Thank you so much, Eldra Jackson III, Shaka Senghor, Robert Mosqueda, and Jason Bryant, for your honesty, your courage, and your vulnerability. Your strength and ability to share what happened to you as a child is helping transform our world. Coming forward with our childhood traumas, instead of keeping it bottled up and in shame, makes a difference to the people watching this. And I hope for the people watching and listening to this that you'll find places where you can come forward with what happened to you, because nothing's wrong with you. What happened to us injured our brains. Child abuse injures your brains, injures your child's brains. And once we know that our brains are injured, we can begin the healing process. If you enjoyed this conversation, please go to our website at compassionprisonproject.org. Please share this conversation, subscribe to our channels, and donate or volunteer with us at Compassion Prison Project. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.